Welcome to the People Data for Good podcast. I'm Al Adamsen, and today I had the great pleasure of speaking with a longtime friend and OG in the space of people analytics, Gene Pease. Gene has been an entrepreneur. He's been a leader in our field for going in excess of 2 decades. Beyond that, and more importantly, he is an extraordinary human being. Let me say it again, an extraordinary human being. And so not only will you learn about the field and its evolution, as well as where it's going, but a bit about him. And he shares his personal story, his struggles, and his inspirations. And so I thank him personally for sharing like he did. And I certainly know that you will enjoy and be inspired by our discussion. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and hope you enjoy.
Hi, welcome back. Gene, how are you doing?
Hey, Al. Great. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Hey, great seeing you as well. And hopefully we'll be in person here before too long. I'm going to get down to Los Angeles at the end of May and look forward to seeing you in person. But in the meantime, we're here to talk about you, your story, and what you think about the world of people analytics and the future of work. So for those who don't know Gene Pease, those few people, would you share a little bit about who you are and how you got into this field?
Yeah, I've been prior to getting into this field, I was a small to mid cap CEO for a variety of companies, 3 or 4 companies through the middle of my career. And I was an out of work CEO in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and didn't want to move, made a deal with my family and my 2 kids to not move them again. And they were in grade school. So I was an out of work CEO in a pretty small town, a great community, but a very small town, Chapel, North Carolina, and hung out at Consulting Shield, which a lot of ex-CEOs do, and bumped into some scientists at Duke University that were trying to apply literally predictive analytics to training investments. And I thought it was not only a fabulous idea, but I thought it could solve a lot of problems when I dug into the training industry. And this is in 2003, 2004. So goes way, way back if you think about analytics being applied to humans at that point. And fell in love with the idea and went in and did some consulting. And in a very short period, 6 weeks or so, quit my consulting practice, joined full-time, wrote a check, and became CEO of this fledgling little company that was trying to literally apply predictive analytics to training investments. And when I dug into the industry, I thought it was so obvious because the whole industry at the time was being measured by surveys, this Kirkpatrick system. And you would take training, and then we would survey you, and you would tell us, do you think it had impact? And then some people even tried to put an ROI on people's opinion to get the ROI of the investment. And I thought that was just ridiculous in this day and age, because I knew predictive analytics was being used in lots of parts of the business, not being used in the human capital part. So I thought, this is so obvious. Great idea. Let's do it. So we went out and attempted to do the work, but really had trouble finding people that wanted that work done. The training industry, number one, didn't want to be measured. And 2 was very comfortable using survey-based methodology to get to what they were hopefully trying to get to was business impact. But we somehow pioneered, we were one of the pioneers, and we had all kinds of ups and downs, found some early clients to keep us alive, went several years with no income, refinanced our houses and all that stuff that entrepreneurs do. But somehow we felt we were really onto something that was important. And even though we didn't have very many early wins, In fact, I bet I talked to 30 people, every 30 people, before we found one that even thought the work was real and they might have an interest in hiring us. But we persevered for some crazy reason. And when we were really broke and I couldn't get an audience speaking on stage because I didn't have a PhD and our company wasn't Deloitte or Accenture or I ended up submitting a outline for a book to Wiley, and Wiley thought it was a great idea, and we ended up writing 3 books on the subject and getting published. And that was really what helped us become a little bit well known and helped us get some clients to survive.
Well, let me jump in there. So, yeah, you don't have a PhD, but you have a magna cum laude from USC, MBA, and you're obviously very intelligent, and you've contributed to the space, and you've inspired me over the years. So, yeah, I mean, you got cred, my friend. So let's just put it there.
A lot of people didn't think so.
Yeah. Well, back then, as you tell your story, I'm like thinking how quaint it is. And, I want to continue on to Vectrix and all that. But before we do, will you just back up a second and tell us how you got into this field? Why did you go to USC in the first place? I know you went to the University of, Cincinnati. Did you grow up in that area? Tell us a little bit about your story before we get into the nuts and bolts.
I'm a builder. And if you go all the way back in my childhood, I grew up in a suburb of Toledo, Ohio in the 50s and 60s, very safe. We'd be out all day running around, and somebody's mother at dusk would yell and we'd have to come home for dinner. It was just a very easy childhood. And my father was an entrepreneur, was a World War II veteran. He and his buddy out of World War II bought a used mimeograph machine, put it in his partner's mother's garage, and started this little company, and became a very stable, moderate-sized company in Toledo, Ohio for, I think he owned it for 40 some years. And so I grew up with the dinner table. My dad would come home, always have dinner with the family, but many times would have to go back to work that night to finish. I started when I was 11 or 10 or 11. I would go to his office on Saturday when he had to work, and he'd put me in the art department. I had my run of creative stuff I could do all Saturday morning while he had to work. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial environment, and so that was pretty natural to me. And I always wanted to, I was always a kid that I was taking apart radios and building blocks, putting those together. And one year I got this little gasoline powered car, and I took the whole thing apart and turned it into a go-kart. And so I was always kind of tinkering with stuff, and ended up going to architecture school at University of Cincinnati. And because I thought I was going to be another Frank Lloyd Wright, but I always liked building things and solving kind of complicated problems. And that's really what architecture is. It's design thinking. Now we talk about design thinking. We didn't use those terms in the 70s when I was in school, but it was all about design thinking, that you have a complicated problem and there's no right solution. You could put 20 architects on the same project and you'd end up with 20 different solutions, and they're not necessarily better than others. They're just different. So I kind of fell into creating things early, got my first degree. And in that program, it was a 6-year program. And 2 years of it, every other semester, we had to go to work in the field as part of the degree. So I had 2 years of work experience when I graduated. And I had worked for some great architects, but kind of consistently, they weren't very good business people. We'd work like crazy and work 7 days a week for a month and finish a project, and then come into the office and they're kind of like, well, we're working on the next project, but we haven't landed it yet. So they were more art. The ones I worked for were more artists than pure businessmen. So when I got out of school and worked for a couple years, I decided to get an MBA because of the business side. I didn't have any experience or education on the business side.
Hmm.
And so I thought an MBA would be a good way to do that. And I picked USC because they had one of the very, very earliest entrepreneur and venture management programs in the country. And so I was able to focus my second year for the most part on entrepreneurship. And that was really fun for me. So I knew I kind of wanted to, I never felt like I really wanted to get a job and think about a pension and be there a long time and work my way up the food chain. And so when I got out of school, I kind of bounced around a little bit.
Well,
I consumer products and lasted about 2 or 3 years at all these large companies I went to work for.
Well, let me jump in there because,
Yeah.
yeah, if I'm listening to you and your story as a builder, as a creator, as a learner, I am thinking about not only the history of our space, that being people analytics and HR tech, but really where we are now and where we're heading. And bear with me on this because I, 10 plus years ago, it's probably longer, I had a slide build and it was a building. It was the Empire State Building, actually. No, it wasn't. It was the Chrysler Building. Sorry, all New Yorkers just threw stuff at me. But anyway, it was the Chrysler Building, and my contention was in that build is that we did not know what we were building. Therefore, we didn't know how to build it. We didn't have a vision for people analytics and the value, how it connected into processes. Therefore, we didn't know how to build it. We were just kind of building the foundation and we had no idea of where we were going upwards or out. And so it was kind of building the plane in the air, so to speak, to draw another metaphor. So in terms of architecting, how people analytics is actually going to take hold. You eventually founded Vestrix and then were able to sell that. And, by that very definition, it was of value to someone. So my pointed question is, how much did you have to help form the vision for what this structure was going to be, this building was going to be, the solution was going to be, so you can help people understand the process by which to build it in their organization?
Well, for me, I had 16 or 18 years as CEO experience between when I got out of college and after I'd worked for a little while. And before I kind of fell into this new field, I'd been a CEO at small to mid cap companies for 16 years or so in 3 or 4 different companies. And so I had a very strong point of view when we were thinking about the measurement of training, are really trying to find out a true business impact, not an assumptive, not someone's opinion, but what was the true ROI of a training investment. And then we discovered, more importantly, the ROI was important, but really finding out where it was working and where it wasn't, what we called optimizing the investment, the optimization of it, so that we could figure out what groups it worked for and where it didn't work, so you could fine tune the training investment as you deployed it. And so for me, it was all about trying to figure out this very fuzzy idea and making it concrete of what's the return on the investment of a training program. Pretty simple proposition. But what I was fighting, and I, to some degree, I still read about it, and it's, people are saying we have to figure out business impact. I'm so beyond getting to business impact now. But that's where it started, was me as a CEO, not coming from a support service or HR. I was coming from the view of the board and the investors and the CEO of, we're going to spend $1 million. What do we expect to get out of it? And then how do we measure it? And then make it better, improve it. There's not every, as you know, 100 people get any intervention, not everybody reacts equally to it. 20 years ago, that was the whole concept, though.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. If I might jump in, speak more to beyond business impact, because 20 years ago is about, okay, how is this training investment going to help that particular process or that particular capability? And now it's so much more. Just the act of investing in people has a benefit, which formerly, at least in my view, was a blind spot to many, that they just care to invest in their development. So can you speak to, from your vantage point as a former CEO, as someone who has worked with boards, what does beyond impact look like to you?
Again, just about every investment we make in people doesn't happen to everybody at the same time. That's kind of how these investments happen. Unless you're at a pretty small company, typically things are done by investment or by geography or by group or something. It's rare where I would give my entire employee base or the entire sales force the exact same thing at the exact same time. So using time as a help to be able to look at the view of what's happening. And so if you can figure out, and now we can, and now over the last 20 years, we've added a lot more variables we can look at. So instead of looking at just sales training, we can look at a lot of the other things in that environment that also affect outcomes. But at the time, we were trying to isolate just training to all the other stuff to see if that investment was moving the needle. And then what we learned, which was obvious now, but that not everybody receives and accepts training in the same way. So we could figure out statistically what groups it was working for and what groups it wasn't. So in the second and third and fourth wave of the investment, you can keep fine tuning it. And that's the cycle of, you don't measure once, you just keep measuring.
Yeah.
If you're making investments, unless it's a asset purchase, but from a people point of view, it needs to be kind of constant, kind of looking at that consistently and fine tuning.
Yeah.
So we didn't know that at the time. I mean, this is all we discovered as we did the work and went, aha, hey, look at this group.
Yeah.
You
Well, fast forward, what you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, is, the employee experience. And, you have all these touch points. You have surveys, of course, but you also have, performance management discussions and ratings, and you might have, even communication now, through O&A technology. So, we can really understand how people are experiencing these training interactions, how they're experiencing these discussions with managers and team members to assess their workload, and all down the line. So my pointed question, based on what you're sharing, you've been through the journey over the last 20 plus years. So you quote unquote get it. But many leaders inside of HR and out have not grown up with this. So they don't understand kind of the uniqueness of HR data, the evolution and achievements that we've made over the years. So how do we then educate them so they can make wise decisions, is my pointed question. What would have resonated, let's say you weren't in this, role. I know that's kind of probably a stretch, but if you're a CEO, what's going to say, hey, that's really cool. I need to prioritize that and make that happen.
Yeah. So if I was a director of people analytics are not even that fancy of a title. And I would try to find a investment that was an important investment, but it was kind of under the radar of senior management. And I would find a sponsor within the company that was very open to experimenting with their data as a proof of concept, so that, and I would, as quietly as I could, without running it up the flagpole, any of that stuff. And this is where kind of maybe the maverick in me comes in as the entrepreneur. I would go do that project, and I probably would tell my boss, but I might not even tell my boss, depending on how I felt his or her, friction was to these kinds of things. And I would do a project and and prove that it had value and that we can improve investments by doing this work. And it would be not trying to boil the ocean. It wouldn't be the most important thing. Then I would work my way up the food chain.
Hmm.
And I would hopefully have a partner that I had on the business side that I had talked into or supported me that would also evangelize it. That, if it's a skeptical CEO in this stuff, that's the only way I would know to do it. You can bring in case studies and all that other stuff, and that's all important work for our industry. But a lot of people, and I've been in those shoes as a CEO, think their company's totally unique. They're typically not, right? But this won't, that case study, that's really quite interesting, but it won't work here because we're different.
Yeah.
And it's really not. But I mean, we're going through that same fight right now with the CEOs that are our age and look like us are forcing people back into the office, and they don't want to go. Many don't. So it's all resistance to change that the boomer CEOs typically have. I can relate, but I have a different point of view of that. So I don't know. I don't know, but the other is, if I really felt resistance, I'd leave. No, I mean, because we do know friends of ours have spent a lot of years banging their head against the wall and haven't made a lot of progress in their companies because of the senior management.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me replay a couple things just to highlight some key points. Number one, these use cases that aren't with our organization, might be interesting, but they won't grab the attention of senior leadership, and you in this case, in large part because you can always write it off because we are different. And in principle, I absolutely agree, because the people within an organization are going to vary. Yes, there are some salient points organization to organization, but depending on the job families, geography, the nature of the work, there's going to be uniquenesses that would have to be responded to. And there's internal dynamics, that's unique to the organization. So in the end, a leader, I would hope, is curious about the system for which they are responsible at that point in time. And that requires somebody to research it, to study it, to be attentive to it on an ongoing basis. So that's what I am pulling out from what you said. A couple more things, and I'm going to push this back to you in a form of a question. The idea that we are going to go and do a project kind of as a kind of skunks works project, totally get that. Sometimes it's warranted. However, we do have to stay within the bounds of ethics and privacy and all those things. So my question is, from your standpoint, as you've seen and built technologies and seen them utilized, what is your role or position on ethics and what I would call responsible use, and as specific as anything, the governance that's required? Like, who's in the room making these decisions from your perspective?
Well, kind of what decisions? So there's decisions that would be made around the use of data. the privacy, the transparency. I believe in transparency in these projects and or these initiatives. It's not even projects necessarily. I think if you're going to staff a department that's going to be looking into people analytics, there needs to be a clear mission. There needs to be a clear understanding within the organization of who these people are, what they're doing, what's being, what data is being looked at, and why it's being looked at. There's two paths you can go on this work. You can go the path to try to root out bad behavior and lower costs and get rid of, the D players, or you can take a path to try to improve people's lives, and it'll clean up some of the junk along the way, but that's not the intent. The intent is to improve people's work situation, improve the productivity, improve the environment for the employees. So I think there's different levels of kind of who would be involved. And again, Al, one of the problems I have with these discussions in our industry, and one of the problems I have with our case studies, and most of the conversation, most of the work is around large companies. And they're the ones that can afford the staffs and the talent and that can do this work, because it's, this is not simple work to do. You need some pretty specialized people to do it if you're going to be successful. What I've been really focusing a lot of my thinking about the last several years has been those companies like that I ran that were mid-size, 500 to 5,000 employees, for example, not 10,000 or 100,000 or 200,000 employees. And I think, so when we have these conversations, I think if I'm at a Fortune 100 versus a mid-sized company, very different, same philosophy, same ethics, but very different, not only problems I'm trying to solve probably, but just even the approach I have because of the size or lack of size of the organization and the resources I may not have that I afford me at a Fortune 500 or 100. So I get kind of frustrated, and not this conversation, but I get kind of frustrated with a lot of this stuff in the industry because it all kind of, this whole discussion we're having on remote work, I don't see a lot of conversations around those companies that have to have people in a factory and in a retail outlet and in places where you have to have employees physically doing things in specific places. It all seems to be the knowledge worker conversation that some want to go back to work and some don't, and then you get into generational. But where I've been focusing a lot of my work has been these mid-size kind of manufacturing type companies that have a variety of different businesses within a business. They might have a distribution center, they probably have a warehouse, they might have a factory or two, they might have retail, a whole variety of, might have some software stuff. So I don't, my thinking goes, there's not a prescription. It's really a set of, I don't know, a set of approach, ethics, and whatever that would be applied differently at a different type of organization and size organization.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. And let's talk about that a little bit because I agree. Particularly in the people analytics, workforce planning, employee experience space, it's by and large organizations that can afford new technologies, and they have people internally who can do the work from a data science or building perspective. But for small to mid-sized companies, they're is a lot of noise around analytics. They probably have a core HR system, payroll system that has some analytics value proposition. And it's like, and they're probably doing a survey occasionally for training or onboarding or engagement or something. And now they have all this data and they're like, oh, heck, what do I do with it? So my question is build or buy? And, does this require someone who's focused on deciding whether to build or buy and manage this ecosystem of technology and data? What are your thoughts from a mid-size company perspective?
I think it's a combination. I think there has to be a person that's not responsible for HR that is spending full time looking at this stuff. And it could be just organizing reporting, or just getting the data, depending on what building blocks and the sophistication or not of the company and their systems. And then I think it's got to be by either consultants and or some of these now vendors are becoming more of a one-stop support shop for them, like One Model, for example. So if I'm a company that's a smaller company and I've got obviously limited resources, I think I would do both, some combination of both.
Well, that's good.
Because I still think you need that human or small group of humans that understand the company, understand, learn the systems, where the data comes from, all that. And I think that knowledge needs to stay within it needs to be within the company, not as a consultant. But then I would augment their work. You don't need to do this work and be a statistician or understand that. You need to understand how to manage them and understand what the results might be and how to interpret those from a business point of view. So I would do both. I would put a small budget together for, depending on the size of the organization, a small group, a leader of that would report to CHRO or VP of HR. And then I would augment it, depending on budgets, with the buy portion of consultants and our software and consulting.
Yeah, and just to put a fine point on that and to wrap it up, is if you have the need, if you're a CHRO, CEO, head of operations, someone like that in a small and mid-sized company, it's like, all right, we have all this data, we're having struggles with retention or productivity or innovation or well-being, all this stuff, then to understand that on an ongoing basis, you need a human being to interpret the results and then interpret the data and insights. Then it invites the question, well, where are the data and insights going to come from? And that doesn't happen for free in these bunch of siloed solutions. There has to be a mechanism by which to bring them together on an ongoing basis. So yeah, I 100% support, where you're going. And you've actually been the creator of products that have done just that have augmented internal capabilities. So we might wrap back round to Vectrix and, Mighty U and other endeavors that you've engaged in over the years. Can you speak to, let's just pick Vectrix, its core value proposition and how your customers utilized it?
Yeah, so we spent 10 plus years trying to figure out how to do the work, and I always thought about building software. But when I went out, in fact, when I got involved in the original first company, we had 2 software engineers that were trying to build some software. And when I went out in the market and started talking to people, there was no need in the market for what we were trying to do. It was perceived. They just didn't want to be measured. They didn't believe the work. We weren't a big company with a big brand name, so they were skeptical of, even though the scientists had PhDs from Duke University, but all that kind of didn't matter. So we had to learn how to do the work And it was fortunate we didn't build the software because there was probably no market at the time. If you think about 2004 and 5,
Right.
but we learned how to do the work and made a lot of mistakes along the way, but figured out our methodology and when to apply the right algorithms and all that stuff. So then 12 years in or something, we thought we could build a product that duplicated our work. So then the value proposition really was getting to a business impact and optimizing that using software instead of statisticians building algorithms and then getting feedback and building new ones, and that whole iteration of building algorithms to answer the question is not only how the investment worked, but where it worked and where it didn't work. So it took us 12 years or so of doing this work before we felt confident that we could attempt to build the software. And when we raised some more money and it really flipped the company from a consulting company to a software company and closed our consulting division and went all in on software. We didn't know if it would work, but we thought we could, and it did work. So the value proposition was that they could do this really sophisticated work really fast without the weeks of iteration of people, statisticians building these models one after another, after another, after another. And then just a simple thing of pivot tables, we had data analysts that would build hundreds of pivot tables to find the 6 or 8 that showed really strong relationships. To our statisticians would then build their work around. We automated that and then prioritized so that the highest correlated value came up first and the least correlated value came up hundredth. And so we automated this again, going way back, we automated this very cumbersome building pivot tables project that we would have 1 or 2 data analysts working full time to find the few. So all of that was automated, and it, thank God at the end of the day, it worked. So we had 6 clients or so that was using it in beta and went out for growth capital because we were thinly capitalized, and Ultimate found us and very quickly wrapped us up and closed on the acquisition. And that was part of a couple companies. They bought Conjoya about 5 months after and combined those technologies into their solution today.
Well, as a former analyst, thank you, because doing that work as a manual lift on what I call an event-driven basis is tough. It's not, pardon me, it's not fast. We're both coughing all of a sudden. I'll just cut to the end. Speed, scalability, and sustainability. So, as an analyst, you can't, you're aggregating data, you're analyzing, you're cleaning it, you're doing all that stuff. Then you're trying to package the insights, then you're trying to distribute the insights, and it's a pain in the tail. And so, this is where we're at. We're covering 20 years in a couple of minutes here. And so, but the key takeaway for any listener, and particularly if you're not in the field, is that if you're hiring somebody, a data scientist, for example, or IO psychologist or someone of that sort, and you're not empowering them with the requisite tools that's going to enable speed, scalability, and sustainability, then they're not going to be able to deliver. So it's necessary in my view. So, but this is your podcast, and I want to be mighty like you. So how's that for a segue? Because this has evolved into Mighty You. So if you can share a little bit about what it is and what inspired you to build it.
So I took a little bit of, and when we sold Vectrix, Ultimate was a wonderful company, but I didn't want to go to work there, to be honest, and they knew that. So I didn't sign a non-compete. They agreed with that. I had a 5 or 6 month transition with them, which was just wonderful because our employees then, to me, got a great transition, and I helped part of that. But then I took some time off, and I wanted to stay in the industry. I wanted to keep doing this work, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I thought originally I was going to build another really super sophisticated analytics product for HR. Um, and so I spent some time and thinking about and going to some um, conferences and did a lot of reading around the new technologies that I would have adopted at Vestrix if we had kept Vestrix. And that was ONA, natural language processing, AI. Not that I'm an expert in any of it, but I'm in the dangerous category of kind of these are the things I think that can help solve either these problems or simplify. So I started looking at all that stuff, and then I started thinking about what it was like when I was a manager. And I have never had, all the way up to my ascension to CEO, I had never had a training class of any time once I got out of school. I was thrown into the deep end. I was promoted, never had any training, never really had a mentor that I thought really added a lot of value. Unfortunately, I wished I'd had. Um, and so I thought about, boy, that was kind of hard. Some of those jobs I had were really hard. They promoted me, didn't give me much support, didn't give me any training and much guidance. And I had to kind of figure it all out. So I thought, boy, I wonder what it would be like today. This is pre-pandemic. And I went out and again talked to a bunch of people, did a bunch of reading, and thought this would really be tough to be a manager. A couple of years ago, I thought would be really hard. So I thought, what could I build to simplify a manager's life in today's environment, pre-pandemic? And instead of building an analytics product, I thought if I could touch a process from hire to retire, I'd have better impact than adding another fancy analytics tool that could help, but it wouldn't be I wouldn't be touching an employee from hire to retire. And so looked at kind of all the processes out there, spent some time talking to some people, and concluded performance management had the greatest opportunity to impact a person's career from hire to fire if it's done right. Looked at the current offerings and thought that the products, although were pretty good, the new products, the new continuous performance management products were pretty good, but they were too complicated. And I really didn't like the VC model of having a core system, and then if you want engagement, you charge $3 more per person per month, and if you want skills, you charge. I really dislike that model as a user and as an employee. I just don't like that model, although it's the VCs love it because it adds incremental income without a new customer, blah, 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 blah. I get that, but I don't think it's a very good model for users. So I thought the products were very complicated. So I took the approach of, could I build a scalpel instead of a Swiss Army knife for performance management? And that's was the goal and the intent. Raised some money for some people in the industry and went out and again, talked to a bunch of people, hired some of the consultants that were pioneers of our industry, like the whole crew from HiQ helped design and build this product. And you wrote a nice note about them last week or this week, whenever it was, on the LinkedIn announcement. So I had some really brilliant people help me build it and started building. And when the pandemic hit was right when we had landed our first enterprise customer, and we were going to launch that spring, our first product live. And we launched. It was a little ugly. We went from 2 training sessions to like 14. Took many more months, but we launched, and the platform Mighty U has been live now at this client for well over a year. So we stabilized it. We fixed all the MVP bugs that we had, and all of that. And in that time frame, the pandemic hit, so we didn't quite know what to do with our marketing messaging because it was wrong immediately from one day to the next. Our messaging was wrong. It was really a super aggressive and against the it's all this. So we fumbled around for a little while, and still the product got stabilized. I had this great consultants that were kind of running the technology and customer adoption. And then I got sick. So the pandemic hit, and I ended up out of, you can tell I'm having trouble saying all this, but out of left field, out of a surprise, I was diagnosed a little over a year and a half ago, with advanced prostate cancer, and immediately went into this very heavy, uh, uh, they call it therapy, regimen of drugs. So for the last year, I've been kind of hanging on. But towards the end of the year, I realized that I can't run a startup with the physical toll that this cancer is taking on me and the therapy. And so in the last month, I've kind of come out of the closet with, I'm sick. I can't work the zillion hours I have for most of my career anymore. And I'm looking for some help with taking my platform to market. So we're out now kind of shopping the platform we built, trying to find a partner to take it to market. We've gotten good feedback on it. It works. We won last year HR Tech Award for Innovation because we do some coaching around feedback on the fly. So we introduced natural language processing in the flow of work. So when you give feedback to somebody, our AI is coaching you on how to give positive feedback, constructive feedback, and not biased. So we've got kind of some cool things that we built within this tool. Again, and the whole idea of trying to simplify and the performance management process, how to simplify that and coach people to give better communication and coaching along the way. So that's kind of my recent story. I'm experiencing both professionally and personally ground that I am not prepared for. So I'm kind of figuring it out along the way. The good news to the story, if there is good news, is I live in LA, and I had 3 second opinions and ended up at one of the finest cancer institutes of the country or the world at UCLA. So I'm getting great treatment. We have stopped the disease from growing. And that's the best I can ask for. This disease, and I'll give a public service announcement to any people listening to this, is to get your prostate as a man checked. If you're 40 or over, get it checked with regularity. I was getting it checked with regularity, and I still came out on the extreme side of the advancement of the disease when we caught it. 1 in 8 men get this disease. 1 in every 41 men will die of the disease. Most men that get this can live a full life with either no therapy or little therapy. A few of us, small percent, get an advanced case that they can't cure, but they can keep it abated. So, which is what we're hoping will happen with me.
Well, yeah, absolutely hoping it's going to happen with you. And thank you for sharing. And I'm sorry that struggle has come upon you, but I know you, and I've known you for a long time now, and I know your resiliency, I know your creativity, and I applaud your openness and courage to share. And so, thank you. Personally, I'm honored that you're doing so, and I think it's very inspiring. And I know by doing so, there's going to be many who will help, and so I will do my part to, be of help myself and
Yeah,
and find others.
I want to keep doing this work. This work's very important, and I really enjoy it. I mean, this is kind of my second career, falling into being part of HR, and it's important. It's makes a difference. So I want to keep doing it. I just can't do it in the kind of capacity I had been previously doing it for most of my career, unfortunately. But I gotta, like most of us, things happen that you can't control. So I've got to kind of get up every day, keep putting my feet in front of each other, and keep moving forward.
Yes, and you do that well, and I appreciate our connection, and I'll say it again, is that our community has been very tight. We started a very, very small community 20 plus years ago, and it's grown massively, particularly over the last 5 years, and it's been accelerated even more with the pandemic. So it's not going away, and performance management, by any stretch of the imagination, has not been figured out. So there's great opportunities. So in the balance of our time, and we probably have 8 minutes give or take left. I'd love to talk about the future, not only for you and Mighty You, but the space in general. If you're advising a CHRO or a head of talent or someone like that, what would you say to him or her, in terms of, what to be looking for in this field?
I'll answer this a little differently. If I was hired as a CHRO, kind of a twist to what you're, I would spend the majority of my time in two areas. I would spend a lot of my time in understanding all of the current systems and data ownership and all that stuff, and try to find a way to simplify the tools and the systems that I force my employees to use. So this whole EX thing, I think, is a wonderful idea, but I'm really not sure the industry's attacking it correctly, because I'm not so sure I'm not convinced they're really looking at simplicity at this point. And that's a huge point of view of mine, is just trying to simplify the things I have to do to get through the day from a organizational point of view. And then number two, I would spend the vast majority of my time coaching, training, talking to first my managers, and then the next level, whatever levels of managers I have influence over, to communicate and how to communicate with their employees. So to communicate often and honest, and be transparent. I feel very strongly that if you have a 6-month or annual review, you should know how you're doing. I mean, I should know how I'm doing in that 6 month when I sit down and if I have a review with my CEO or my CHRO, because I've had communication throughout that 6 months. on how I'm doing and how I can improve and how you can help me in blocks. So, and where I've got, issues. But so for me, it's trying to simplify our lives and then increase in communication between humans. I think those are two critical. I think the technologies have gotten way too complicated, to be honest. Um, and we're not communicating often enough, not from a friendship, but from a communication of the work and how you're doing, accomplishing the work. And then obviously the personal stuff flows into that because you can't disassociate it.
Your point's well taken, because this ecosystem is ever evolving. In some cases, it's expanding appropriately. In other cases, it's expanding haphazardly and causing the employee experience to be adversely impacted. Because to your point, there's so much noise and tools and that I'm interacting with. There is the conscious creation of the employee experience is certainly warranted, and there are room for scalpels, these pointed technologies that help, best of breed, if you will, but not all the time, so making these conscious decisions with appropriate governance bodies, I think is critical to our earlier conversation. As we start to wrap up, I mean, Gene, I can talk to you all day, and I'm just I'll just say it again. I pray for your health and well-being and your continued success with Mighty You and your other endeavors. How can people learn more about what you're up to and Mighty You?
Well, my LinkedIn is probably the best place or easiest place to get a hold of me. My email address, my phone number, all that is on that. And I don't know what the future looks like, but I'm certainly having some very interesting conversations just in the last few weeks as I've, let my friends like know that I'm struggling. I'm personally struggling and I need some help. And so I'm very open for any kind of conversation. Because they're kind of fun, and meeting new people in our industry is always fun. So hit me up at LinkedIn, or send me a direct email at my personal one, and all that's on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I don't know the future either, but I do know something about the future, and that is that you're going to be at a soccer match soon. And do you want to share what your shirt is all about?
Well, I'm doing some advertising for Angel City FC. It's the new women's pro soccer team in Los Angeles. And it's an entirely new sports model. It's founded by women. It's majority financially owned by women. It's 85 or 90% of their staff. Their coaches, women. It's just a model that was started by a local venture capitalist, Natalie Portman, and a local entrepreneur, 3 females, thought that Los Angeles needed a women's pro soccer team, and by God, they pulled off. Our first game is Friday night, and they've sold more season tickets than the LA Lakers, the LA Clippers, the Rams, all of the pro sports teams. They have outsold their initial season ticket holders. So for me, it's a fascinating study in a organization that's all female owned and run.
And all this information because?
Well, one is I'm a soccer fan. Particularly, I'm a women's soccer fan because my daughter played soccer, and now she happens to be the director of ticket sales for Angel
There
City.
you go. That's what I was fishing for. Thank you for giving it to me.
Heather Pease, give her some credit.
Well, hey, Gene, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being you. Here to help. You're awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks. Thanks, Al. Really enjoyed it. Great catching up with you.
Absolutely. Well, see you soon, all right?
You will.
Cheers.
See you, buddy.
Thank you for listening today. If you want to learn more about today's guest, go to pafal.net. You'll be able to see links to the bio as well as to the video of today's program. You'll also have the chance to support this podcast and other shows that we do by becoming a PAFAL community member. You can also donate if you choose. What will be helpful to support PAFAL, the People Data for Good movement, and me will be to share this episode with friends and coworkers and others who might find it valuable. Finally, for updates on upcoming episodes, shows, and events, please subscribe to our newsletter at pafal.net. At the bottom, you can also see our social media presence. So please subscribe to our company page on LinkedIn, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. We're active as can be, and we want to provide this content to you that is timely, relevant, and actionable. So again, thank you for listening today and hope to see you soon. I also want to give a shout out to Jenna Dern, Malaz El Sheikh, and Sarah Sparnan, who without them, this show would not happen. And now go out and make some great things happen.